Hello everyone, Mr. Wolf Recaps here. Today, I'm going to explain an American drama thriller film called Stonehurst Asylum. Relax and enjoy. At the beginning of the film, a professor from Oxford University shows a case of female hysteria on Eliza Graves. In front of his class, she protests that she is healthy, but the professor mercilessly provokes her hysteria by touching her inappropriately. Every human touch drives her crazy. After the demonstration, he asks his assistant to bring in the next patient. Cut to Christmas Eve. A young doctor, Edward Newgate, from Oxford, arrives at Stonehurst Asylum. He is led into the building by the guards and the head of the guard, Mickey Finn. The asylum consists of inmates. Most of them are lords and ladies, from the best British families. PhD. Edward is here to gain clinical experience for his further medical practice. He meets the asylum manager, Dr. Silas Lamb. Edward impresses Dr. Lamb with his willingness to work with the mentally challenged. So Dr. Lamb invites Edward to make an afternoon visit with him. She introduces him to the patients of Stonehurst. Some think they are animals, some are delusional, while some are there because they are gay. But one patient in particular caught drive Edward's eyes are Lady Eliza Graves, the woman shown at the beginning of the film. She is in an asylum, being treated for female hysteria. She belongs to a noble family and is married to a very wealthy man. Unfortunately, Lady Eliza suffers from hysteria. She reacts negatively to all physical touches. She bit off her abusive husband's ear, so her father sent her to an asylum. Dr. Edward is fascinated by Eliza's musical skills. He seemed to charm her too. Edward is surprised by Drive Lamb's unique way of treating his patients. Instead of working to solve their problems, he celebrated their conditions and allowed them to live happily in their delusions. Dr. Lamb invites Edward to a staff dinner that evening. Many dishes were laid out according to their labels on the dining table, but Edward is surprised to see patients joining them on the table. According to Dr. Lamb, it is therapeutic for patients to mingle with polite society. At dinner, everyone chats happily until Dr. Edward mentions that Mickey Finn is a funny name. This causes tension in the evening. Everyone is silent, but Mickey Finn starts laughing hysterically. He then offers Drive Edward a glass of alcohol. He was about to drink it when Lady Eliza kicked him under the table. The doctor dropped the drink. Then Eliza takes him out on the pretext of cleaning his shirt and tells him to escape the asylum as soon as possible. She doesn't give a reason why. That night, Edward goes to his room, confused. He prepares his gun in case he needs it in the future. Edward was startled by a loud noise. Follow him and reach the basement. There are several people in prisons who are begging for his help. His first thought is that they are extremely crazy patients. But after talking to them, he realizes that they are the actual staff and manager of the asylum. Lamb was actually the patient who led the rebellion. He locked out the staff and let the patients run things, including Finn. Among the prisoners are the actual manager of the asylum, Dr. Benjamin Salt, 2 nurses, a health guide and many others. They gave them a drug-laced drink and took them to the basement. Edward realizes that he would have ended up like them if Lady Eliza hadn't saved him today. Terrified, Edward rushes to tell Eliza the truth. But she already knows everything. In fact, she is one of the lunatics who helped Dr. Lamb shut down the staff. The next day, Lamb takes Edward and Mickey Finn with him on afternoon tours. They make Edward go to the insane asylum to change his clothes. A madman is terrifying to behold. When Edward initially approaches him, the man attacks him. He almost chokes Edward, but soon he notices the name Arthur written on the wall. Edward assumes it's the name of a madman, so he calls him Arthur. This finally calms the man down. Dr. Lamb is impressed, but Edward ends up with a lot of injuries. After the meeting, Mrs. Eliza tends to his wounds. Edward tells her of his intentions to free the prisoners at that time and escape with them. She reveals that back then the Stonehurst Asylum was a cruel place for patients, where Dr. Salt experimented on them. His ways and ideas matched those of the devil. Lamb, Mickey Finn, Eliza, the cooks and the guards were victims of Dr. Salt's cruel method. He touched Eliza inappropriately to make her hysterical. Under the pretext of finding a cure for her, he applied strong water pressure to some of his patients and kept them in running water for days. According to Drive Salt, the patient's worst fear is the way to cure their madness. But he struggled to find Lamb's worst fear. Dr. Salt performed all kinds of terrifying procedures on Lamb. When he was a patient, Lamb and the other patients began to despise Drive Salt, so they spent months planning their way to escape the torture. Finally, one day, they drank. The doctor and the staff and locked them up. Lamb took Dr. Salt's place as head of the asylum and let the patients live freely. He employed some of them as porters, some as cooks, and some as nurses. He gave their whole lives purpose and made Stonehurst a happy place. After hearing the story, Edwards vows that she will never have to suffer the way she did again. Soon, Edward impresses everyone at the asylum. An old woman refused to eat until her son returned from the war. Edward introduces himself as her son and lovingly feeds the lady. Seeing this encounter, Eliza is more attracted to Edward. His kindness impressed her. The couple begins to fall in love with each other. Edward tries to convince her to escape the asylum with him, but Eliza doubts the idea. Not long after, Edward is called by Drive Lamb. Dr. Lamb wants Edward to help him with an experimental procedure on Dr. Salt. They tie him to the bed. Dr. Lamb claims that Dr. Salt is a madman who believes he is the rightful manager of Stonehurst and needs therapy. This therapy is called electrotherapy. Then in front of Edward, Dr. Lamb hits the switch, electrocuting him. He asks Edward to do the same. After electrotherapy, Drive Salt loses all memory. The next day is the new year. Everyone in Stonehurst is celebrating and happy. Edward intends to free the prisoners. There's a ceremony. Tonight, everyone dances while Dr. Lamb watches them elsewhere. Edward knows that Drive Lamb has some good in him, so he sets out to find him in Lamb's room while he was a patient. Edward finds a hidden painting inside the wall and takes it with him. Everyone comes out in front of the building to celebrate the arrival of the new century, but Edward stays inside to douse the champagne with a chemical that will knock everyone out. However, Mickey Finn catches him in the act. After a fierce fight, Edward breaks free from Finn. Sparkling champagne is brought to the celebration and distributed to everyone. But as they are about to drink it, Mickey Finn stops them and Edward's act is caught. PhD. Lamb hits him with a bottle. When Edward opens his eyes, he is strapped to a hospital bed and taken to an electrotherapy room. Dr. Edward is about to be electrocuted, as Dr. Salt did just then. Eliza enters the room with Edward's pocket watch. There is a picture of Eliza on it. She assumes that her husband sent Edward to get her out of the asylum. She asks him about his true intentions in coming to the asylum. He reveals that 6 months ago he was at a medical lecture where the doctor presented Eliza and her medical disability. He felt so sorry and saddened by her condition that he vowed to save her from that hell. This was the real reason Edward came to Stonehurst Asylum. As he is being led away, he asks Eliza to escape from the asylum. Just as Dr. Lamb is about to electrocute him, Edward asks for a final will. His request is that Eliza Graves give the picture he has in his pocket, but in reality, the painting is the one Edward found in Lamb's room. Dr. Lamb looked at him and was shocked. The image is the root cause of his madness. It is revealed that Dr. Lamb was the real war doctor. He had to kill his soldier friends to relieve them of their pain. He shot each of them to death and tried to kill himself, but he ran out of bullets. It drove him crazy. Over time, the picture Edward showed him was a picture of one of Lamb's soldier friends, so that started his madness again. Dr. Lamb runs out of there. Seeing this, Mickey Finn decides to perform the procedure on Edward himself, but Eliza comes to Edward's rescue. The whole asylum watches them fight merrily. However, Finn induces her hysteria by touching her trigger point, sending her into a frenzied state. Edward manages to calm her down. Then the fight continues. Mickey Finn finally gets electrocuted and burns to death. But the fire spreads and the room starts to burn. Eliza escapes to rescue the prisoners from the basement, while Edward goes to look for Lamb. He found him in the corridor, beside himself and delusional. So Edward takes him outside with the other patients. Everyone is safe now. Everything is done. Edward wants Eliza to come to a new place with him, but Eliza refuses. They kiss one last goodbye when Edward tells Eliza that he has one last secret to share. Now it's a few months later. Stonehurst is back to normal and better than ever. The real head sister seems to be running things a bit later, now caring for patients, including Salt and Lamb. The Oxford professor from the beginning of the film and Eliza Graves' husband arrive at the asylum to release her, but they are surprised when they are informed that Drive Edward had already fired her 3 weeks ago. The men are surprised to hear this because the professor himself is Dr. Edward Newgate, the real Dr. Edward. He explains that the person who came here posing as a doctor was actually his patient. He saw Eliza Graves at a medical demonstration in Oxford. And then he escaped from the hospital in London with Dr. Edward's belongings and stole his identity all to save Eliza Graves. At the end of the film we see Mrs. Graves in Tuscany, Italy. They are now known as Drive. And the lady, the two of them are happily dancing and embracing in the garden of what seems to be, is another hospital peacefully run by nuns. It's the end of the movie Stonehurst Asylum. Now the explanation. Edward, a mentally ill patient, constantly suffers from a condition called pseudologia fantastica, better known as pathological lying. It is a condition in which a person constantly lies without personal gain. Edward has been doing this for years. We never found out his real name, but, despite his disorder, he possesses unique qualities of love and empathy. His love and empathy for mentally ill people like him allowed him to help those people. Even Eliza's fear of being touched was cured because of him, because Edward is able to act like a sane and normal person. The audience won't think he's crazy. Edward's character is built very strongly. One of the messages conveyed from this movie is about how great the power of love is. It is even capable of overcoming the greatest human suffering. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel.